What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Over Analysis. Today we're talking about the Philadelphia Eagles, their fantasy relevant players, and whether or not we are targeting or fading them in our drafts this summer. At quarterback, Jalen Hurts comes off of a season in which he finishes as the QB8. Hurts has finished as a QB1 for 5 straight seasons. With Hurts, a ton of his value has always been tied to his rushing, particularly with his touchdowns that he gets at the goal line from the Eagles' tush-push play. Hurts has had at least 400 yards rushing and at least 8 touchdowns in each of the last 5 seasons. And for any other quarterback, a year where they score 8 touchdowns on the ground would be enough to propel them into the top 10 at the quarterback spot. So as long as the tush-push doesn't get outright banned, then Hurts is always going to carry that very safe floor with him. One thing to note with the tush-push, though, was that the Eagles did run the play a lot less the further we got into last season. The Eagles were not as efficient with the play last season as they had been in previous years. They had a lot of injuries on the offensive line. Cam Jurgens was never right at the center position. Landon Dickerson at guard, same thing. He was never 100% last year. And even Hurts himself was a little banged up at times. So while there was definitely a fall-off with how often the Eagles went to the play last year, it's still something that should be very much a staple of their offense going into this season. And that's good news for Jalen Hurts because Hurts really does need the tush-push to be fantasy relevant. Hurts has never been prolific as a passer. He's never thrown for more than 25 touchdowns. He's also never thrown for more than 3,800 yards, a career high that he hit back in 2023. In 3 of the last 5 years, Jalen Hurts has been below 3,300 passing yards. And while there's a lot of people that are excited about what new offensive coordinator Sean Mannion can bring to the table for the Eagles offense, I just don't know that Hurts is ever going to be a guy that's going to spike with his passing numbers. And let's look at what Hurts did in the Kellen Moore passing offense just 2 years ago. That season, Hurts actually threw for only 2,900 yards and only 18 touchdowns, and that was with an offense that was loaded with both A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith at wide receiver. So with Sean Mannion, obviously there's nowhere to go but up from what the Eagles were last season with Kevin Patullo as offensive coordinator, but you're still going into a situation where you don't have A.J. Brown anymore. You did draft Makai Lemon with a first-round pick to replace him, but he is still just a rookie. So I don't really see the path for Jalen Hurts to spike past anything what he's been the last couple of years, which has been the QB8. He's had back-to-back finishes at that spot. Because even if he still scores 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns because of the push, I just don't think you're ever going to see that spike season with passing from Hurts where he's going for over 4,000 yards and 30 touchdowns. Definitely not with this personnel group. And Hurts is still pretty pricey in drafts. You're getting him at his ceiling right now, which is at the QB6 spot. If I was going to draft a quarterback in that range, I would much rather take Caleb Williams ahead of a guy like Jalen Hurts. And if I miss on Williams, then I'm just wading even further into the draft and going for the Brock Purdy, Jared Goff tier. But Hurts at that QB6 price, I think it's more likely that he finishes closer to the bottom tier of the QB1 ranks, somewhere in the 8, 9, 10 range, than he does at the QB6 spot that you're drafting him at. So Jalen Hurts is going to be a fade for me. At running back, Saquon Barkley fell off a little bit for the Eagles last season. He finishes as the RB14 following a year where he was the RB2 in 2024. And Barkley's fall off was a very natural thing. History shows that running backs that take on such a high volume like Barkley had in 2024 are just bound to fall off a little bit the year after. The good news for Barkley now is that because of his fall off last season, he can now be had at a discounted price this year. Barkley right now is currently going as the RB10, which means that you don't even need to spend a first round pick to get him. You can get him in the early to mid second round of drafts. Saquon at that range at RB10 is both a very safe pick, but also a guy that has a chance to really exceed that ADP. He's still going to be the focal point of this offense. The Eagles are still going to be a run-first team, and I think there's a chance that his passing game usage could spike a bit this year too. Again, with no A.J. Brown, that's going to open up a lot of targets. They're not all going to go to Makai Lemon. They're also not all going to go to DeVonta Smith or Dallas Goedert. There's going to be a nice little flurry of targets that get spread across the Eagles' key skill position guys. So I could see a bounce-back year for Barkley where he's going for over 1,200 yards, double-digit rushing touchdowns, and 50-plus receptions. I think he's still a guy that should be in the conversation for a top 5 finish at the running back position. I would happily take him over a guy like Ashton Genty, who is going in the first round currently. So Barkley is definitely a guy that I'm going to be in on this season. I'm going to buy the dip, and I'm going to enjoy him outperforming that RB10 ADP. At wide receiver, a lot of people are excited about the outlook for DeVonta Smith this year. I'm not one of them. And while yes, Smith is now the team's #1 wide receiver with A.J. Brown now in New England, however, I don't know that that necessarily translates to that much of a stat boost for DeVonta Smith this year. And for me, one of the concerns that I have is that I still don't think the Eagles are going to be a high-volume passing offense. Again, it's still going to be a team that's looking to run first. And Jalen Hurts, again, going back to his career passing numbers, more often than not, this has been a guy that's been below 3,500 passing yards, below 25 touchdown passes. And Smith has just never been much of a red zone guy throughout his career, so it's hard for me to see him spiking in touchdowns past that 6 to 8 range. The Eagles aren't going to go to him before they go to Saquon Barkley inside the goal line. They're not going to go to him before they go to Dallas Goedert like they did with the shovel passes last year. They're not going to go to DeVonta Smith before they go to a Jalen Hurts tush push. So if Smith stays at what he's always been when it comes to touchdowns, then the only way that he's going to really spike in value is if he gets a ridiculously high amount of volume. Smith would have to add about 25 to 30 catches to his reception totals from the last few years just to make it into the wide receiver 1 ranks. And while that's not impossible for him to do, you're still paying a high price tag for him. You're drafting him right now as the wide receiver 13, so you're making that bet that he's going to get close to 100 receptions, go over 1,000 yards, get 7-8 touchdowns, and then maybe finish at the cost that you drafted him at. So I'm out on DeVonta Smith. I'd rather let someone else overdraft him. I'm going to wait and go for the Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden, Ladd McConkey tier at the end of round 3 into round 4. I just don't think that the passing volume is there for DeVonta Smith to really have this spiked year that everyone seems to be expecting. Now, Makai Lemon, on the other hand, is a much more reasonable swing to take, coming in as the wide receiver 45 right now, and stepping into a role where he should at least get volume to be relevant as a flex play or a wide receiver 3 play. And again, generally, first-round picks at the wide receiver position are usually pretty good bets to make in fantasy football. So Lemon has the draft capital invested in him. He also doesn't have a ton of target competition. He's fighting with guys like Marquise Brown, Dontavian Wicks, just these mediocre veterans for the wide receiver 2 role. Now, on the downside, once again, when it comes to passing volume, I don't know that there's going to be enough of it for Lemon to really outperform his ADP and finish as a low-end wide receiver 2. But at cost, I would much rather have Makai Lemon in the later mid-rounds than I would spending a late second, early third-round pick on DeVonta Smith. And then at tight end, Dallas Goedert is perfectly fine, coming in as the tight end 13 right now. Goedert last season ran hot with touchdowns, finishing with a career-high 11. And while I definitely think that 11 touchdown mark makes him a candidate for touchdown regression this year, he's still going to be fine as a streaming option throughout the year. And the range that he's going in, he's not being overdrafted by any means. Tight end 13 is fine for a guy like him. So if you want to get Goedert as part of a late tight end build, I'm completely fine with that. You could get him and pair him with a younger guy with more upside like Isaiah Likely or Chikakonkwo. But he's going to be completely playable all season. And even if he doesn't spike with touchdowns like he did a year ago, there should be a little more volume available for Goedert with A.J. Brown gone. So that will help his floor a little bit as well. And that's going to do it for this one, guys. So with the Eagles, this is a team that should be an improved offense from what they were a year ago. That being said, I'm pretty selective here when it comes to the guys that I want exposure to, and really it's more so the guys that are available at a discount. So I love the dip on Saquon Barkley. I think RB10 is a really undervalued price tag for him. Also, the later round guys like Makai Lemon, Dallas Goedert, they're both fine. And I don't like where Jalen Hurts or DeVonta Smith are going. I think with those two, you're drafting them at their ceiling, and there's not a lot of room for error for them to return value on the picks that you're spending on them.